Good evening, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us, either live or perhaps later on watching the recording. Tonight's Facebook Live session is focusing on water, something that's obviously a key infrastructure issue for councils, and something that's going through a lot of reform, as it has been for the last 6 years, to be fair. Joining me this evening, we've got Paul Hope, Director of New Titles
Support Services.
Support Services. That's nice and easy.
Yeah.
So thanks, Paul. And we've also got Josh Rendell joining us again. So thanks very much, Josh. And if you'd like to give your title as well.
Yes. Yep. Infrastructure Manager.
So we're talking with talking about water. We're looking at all aspects around that. Of particular note are the particular reforms that are happening at the moment with this government, with Local Water Done Well. We are looking at having to have a water services delivery plan sorted and delivered to the government by the 4th of September. There's a lot of work going on in the background with that, and that's certainly part of the focus for our long-term plan. So we welcome any questions that people might give. We've received a number already, so we will address those as we go through. But probably just to give a bit of an update on where we are with the with our water services delivery plan and the discussions we're having. Essentially, the government has required us to give them a plan which has at least two options. One of them has to be the status quo, essentially how we deliver water now and how we would do that into the future. The other one is looking at some other form of entity, pretty much with the way they've framed that, that's going to be a council-controlled organisation, a company, which we may appoint directors on, but that basically they get on and deliver the water services. That can be a standalone, so a single council CCO, or it could be a multi-council CCO. The discussions we're having at the moment are looking at our neighbours and just working basically with a coalition of the willing. There's no compulsion for any particular council to join any particular group, unlike the former government's proposals, where it was going to be 4 entities across New Zealand, which then became 10 entities. So we were going to be in an Otago Southland one or a Canterbury one. With the last election result, that government went, and the new government came in on the basis that they weren't going to carry on with that particular proposal, but they were going to still look at water reform. So that's where we're at as far as what our obligations are. The discussions we're having in particular have been both to the south and to the north of us. So we've been discussing this with Central Otago, Clutha and Gore. So looking at a 4-council CCO, and we've also been discussing it with 3 South Canterbury mayors, 3 South Canterbury councils, being Timaru, Mackenzie and Waimate. We've had financial studies done on both of those groupings, and the results have come back, and they're still only very much draft, so they're not showing what the ultimate picture could be. Very hard to get all of the nuances correct in that, but at least it gives us an indication of the general direction. Probably the result of that really is that the 4 southern councils, including ourselves, we are looking at proceeding with developing the model. We're going to be having a report come to us, I think it's next week, council meeting.
Next week.
Yeah, where we'll be making the decision or not to proceed investigating that. The key word there is investigating. We're not going to be making any decision on whatever group we might join. It's really looking at those options. We're also, with the northern group, the South Canterbury councils and ourselves, we know Waimate is not keen on joining with others. They've got their own view on that, and that's fine. That's their prerogative. We're going to be having a discussion or continued discussions with Timaru and Mackenzie, and it may be that they are interested in joining the southern group. So Could be up to 6 councils, but at any point in time, any one of those councils might decide it's not working for them and their ratepayers, and they could be out. So that's really the direction that we're taking there. So as far as our long-term plan and what we're planning for expenditure and so on, I'll let Paul and Josh get into some of the detail on those things. We are looking basically over the next 9 years of spending some $160 million on water. It was originally proposed over the what was the 10-year plan last year, which ended up not being a 10-year plan. That we were looking at 440 million. Essentially, we don't have the capability to deliver that much, and we don't have the ability to borrow that enough to carry out that capital program. The councillors and I have said to staff, bring back a plan that actually is something that we can achieve. So, hence the 150, $160 million project amount of projects over the next 9 years. In the long-term plan, we've got to show what the financials look like. If we carry on doing water for the next 2 years, then those financials are in there for that. But if that then becomes a council-controlled organisation that sits outside council, and so our financials no longer have them there, ratepayers will still have to pay the costs of water, but it will be to the separate entity. So, with all of that, Josh, perhaps do you want to talk a wee bit about some of the projects themselves that we're looking at and why they need to be in there?
Yes, absolutely. I'm just hastily trying to find them in the background now that you've mentioned the particular
Sorry.
initiatives that we've got.
We should have talked about that before.
Yeah, we should have, yes. We've got quite a few. I mean, we've got some significant challenges with the revised regulatory environment that we're currently operating in, both in terms of water infrastructure and treating water to the required standards, but also forthcoming in the wastewater space. We're waiting for some clearer guidance from Taumata Arawai, who is the water regulator, on discharges for wastewater, which at the moment are regulated by regional councils. So for us, it's Environment Canterbury and Otago Regional Council. And that's going to help us refine a lot what we're going to need to be looking at in terms of discharge consents for our wastewater treatment plants. Most of our wastewater treatment plants are quite old. The consents that we've got will be expiring in sort of the next 10 to 15 year period, which is going to trigger quite significant upgrades for a few of the suppliers. One of which is Oamaru's wastewater treatment plant, Tiwai Duncan. Early estimations on the required nutrient removal, POD, wastewater discharge standards are indicating that the plant, given its size, is probably likely to cost somewhere between $80 and $100 million to upgrade. So watching very, very closely what changes occur in that regulatory environment to see how we can bring some of those costs down. We've got quite a lot of work on renewing a lot of our infrastructure, water mains, wastewater mains, some of our stormwater mains. We've got quite a lot of pipe work that's not quite at the end of its life, but reaching near to the end of its life. We've still got quite a lot of water mains that were installed when we first used the water to generate power here in central Oamaru. So 140, 150-year-old pipes that are still being used to deliver water to people's households. But a lot of our networks were installed during the 50s and the 70s, and those are kind of starting to come towards end of life now. So lots and lots of work on renewing a lot of our infrastructure. Quite a lot of work on kind of understanding the condition of a lot of our water mains and wastewater mains, making sure that we're planning appropriately for the renewals that we need to do, trying to make the best use of the assets that we currently have rather than renewing things too early or too late. We've seen some experiences from other councils around New Zealand where they have waited too late and then we end up with sewage in the streets and major water issues and outages. So that's just a bit of an example of some of the work that we're looking at over the next 10 to 15 year period, but certainly adds up to an awful lot of money.
Mm. Yeah, I think just on that wastewater side of things, there's been a lot of councils very, very concerned. That was a huge blip in their expenditure. If it was going to be a requirement to discharge to land, in our own case, we've been told that we would need to purchase perhaps another 1,000 hectares of land to find enough land in the right area was going to cost a heck of a lot of money. So if we can, if the standards change and that's not the requirement, it will likely be that we do need to treat our water more so that it is much cleaner. It's already pretty well treated, but it certainly meets consents, but likelihood is it's going to be greater to be able to discharge water. Then that will still cost us, but it won't be anywhere near what those other costs will be. And I think one of the interesting things, you know, if there's something interesting around wastewater, not all wastewater is equal. And you were talking about BOD and various things there, Josh. So, yeah, we've had some issues recently around the stock truck dump stations or whatever they're called on the highways, where people were putting other things in there. So, do you want to just explain why those different things affect the effectiveness of the treatment plant?
Yep, absolutely. So contamination can enter into the wastewater system in a number of different ways. It can be from a trade waste process where an industrial process has been occurring and the treatment of the particular site might not have been sufficient, so they discharge it directly to the wastewater system, and then we've got to treat it at the plant. Or in the case of the stock effluent sites, we had a number of people who, a number of instances where instead of just being the stock effluent that usually gets discharged to those particular pits, people were dropping off what looked to be septic tank waste and grease trap waste, which put a lot of strain on our wastewater treatment facilities. The Oamaru facility in particular, it's been in place for a very, very long time, and whilst we've made some adjustments throughout its lifetime, some upgrades to try to ensure that it can to treat what it needs to, it certainly is punching above its weight in terms of how much it's able to treat versus what it was designed to treat. So when we're getting close to the end of an asset's life in terms of how much it can deal with, any of those contamination instances really do put a lot of strain on the system and cause us to potentially discharge effluent that isn't compliant with our consents.
Thanks very much, Josh. Paul, do you want to talk on the financial side of CCOs, what the different situations are around borrowing limits, those sorts of things, because there's quite significant differences in how we cope with the cost that's coming.
Yes, certainly. So one of the major adjustments that the government has made in terms of how it wants councils and CCOs to deal with the financial sustainability of water services, it will allow CCOs to have a far higher debt loading compared to a council. So at the moment, the maximum a council can go to is 250% of revenue, whereas it is allowing a CCO to have 500% of revenue. So that's a significant difference and really does give a lot of advantages to a CCO in being able to carry more debt. And why essentially the difference for that is that comes to the international rating agencies, and they understand utilities, which certainly the water provider will be. They understand the gearing that can be attached to it, so that's the amount of debt that they can carry compared to the amount of revenue that they can generate. They don't have the same understanding of councils, especially in New Zealand, and so because of that, they really insist on a far lower level of debt to the amount of revenue. So that's a really big difference, and really something that this council has focused on for a long time, because we look at the amount of debt that's going to be required given the spending profile that we've got, and really water will consume so much of council's debt capacity, it will really limit the choice that council will have going forward about other areas to spend money on. So that's a key consideration, and one of the main reasons that the preferred option the council came up with is putting the services into a CCO. Probably the other thing we haven't talked about too much, we've talked about the changing regulatory regime in terms of water quality and wastewater discharge. The other thing will be this will introduce a regulatory regime in terms of the charges and protecting the consumer debt levels. So that'll all be run through the Commerce Commission, so they'll be known as the economic regulator. And what it'll put in place is something very similar to the electricity industry. So, when we know there's concerns probably right across the country about things being privatised, about monopolies charging too much, about them not being responsive to customers if there's issues. And those are all things that will be addressed by the economic regulator. It'll look far more like the electricity sector can, where there's a lot of regulation about what's spent, the charges that can be made, and how consumers are protected. So that's a big change that we're also working through the impact of that on the CCO and on council, because all water service providers, so not just the CCOs, will fall under this economic regulation regime. So councils, if they are continuing to deliver it, will be expected to be just as accountable and just as transparent as a standalone company. So it will really create quite a duplicated reporting and planning regime. So you have to do everything quite separately for water, which is something we're quite used to with the targeted rates and the individual schemes. And so, not a big change for us, but a very significant change for a lot of the, particularly the metro councils, so that's the city councils, where they've got all of these services combined into a single charge, and sometimes even funded through general rates or really non-transparent funding mechanisms. So, it's another big change that we're sort of looking at in this space.
Yeah, no, I think that's part of what's forgotten, when we're talking about CCOs, is that we've got this regulation that's coming in over the top of all of this, and we're all going to have to face up to it, and it does impact the viability of keeping it in-house versus having it somewhere else. So probably should just mention too, councils like Queenstown Lakes District are considered to be high growth councils, and they've been given, I don't think they've been given it yet, but it's proposed that they be given an extra capacity to borrow. And so legislation will be coming through which allows them to borrow up to 350% of their overall revenue, which in the case of Queenstown, it makes a difference as to whether they need to join with someone else or whether they are best to go alone. Because of the huge growth that they have, the whole modelling around the future financials is very different to everyone else, and they're a bit of an outlier in that respect. So that's just to point out. It's one of the reasons why we're not, we have been talking with Queenstown Lakes District Council, but we're really not involving them in our discussions now. Dunedin City Council has chosen to do its own thing, and I believe it's signing a MOU with the Christchurch City Council. So they're choosing to do their own thing, just as in further south, Southland District and Invercargill City Councils are still working on their options.
Looks like Mandy's itching to ask us some questions.
She probably does have some questions. So.
I do have a question actually, which directly relates to that borrowing topic, which we received prior to tonight's discussion. And we've got one of our pre-questions that says, how is it or why is borrowing seen as the easy way out for councils? Isn't Waitaki already a couple $100 million in debt? So why don't we just simply do a staggered project within our budget and tick along as we go instead of a major borrowing straight away? So if you could talk to that.
Yeah. Essentially, there's been a huge acceleration in water projects, and that's used up a lot of our depreciation reserves within our water activity. There is a lot more to be done. A chunk of this came from the Havelock North issue with a lot of people getting sick from E. coli, and that's certainly changed a lot of the requirements around drinking water. But there's also environmental standards, and in some cases it's been a case that actually some of the authorities which are supposed to be looking after some of these standards haven't been doing their jobs, and sometimes councils have got away with doing some things they shouldn't be doing, and breaching some consents and so on. And in some cases, some councils just not renewing consents and being well overdue for them. So there's a whole lot of work that's been going on there. But this, the Waitaki District Council has been very prudent over the years. We have put away money for well over 20 years, 25 years probably, that money's been put aside for depreciation, and that's been getting spent along the way on the things that it was collected for, which is really important. And we're at that point where the cost of everything is such that we've got to fund these things. If we use a couple of recent examples, a number of 4 or 5 years ago, was it, Josh? We did the upgrade at the Honorary Water Treatment Plant. We put extra treatment capacity in there. We put another large storage tank for treated water up there. More recently, we've just finished on the South Hill, another water treatment, treated water tank up there, very large things. And those things have cost millions of dollars. It's not practical to rate people for a number of years to collect that money and then do that project or those projects for a number of reasons. One is, by the time you've collected enough, it's probably not enough because the costs have gone up. So, you're always chasing that part of it. The other is, we may have been collecting rates for 5 years. There's some of those people that were paying those rates may not be there now. They might have moved out of the district. They may be deceased. So it's been paid for by people who won't get any benefit from it. Loan funding not only allows us to get on and do it more immediately and at the current price rather than a future increased price, it actually gives generational equity, and that is really around those people who benefit from it are the ones who pay for it. So if we've got something, if those particular projects are loan funded over 20 years, someone's in a property, say, for 10 years, then they've been paying towards it for 10 years, and then they sell their house, someone else comes in, and for the next 10 years, they'll continue paying for that service, which is benefiting them. There are also, there's development contributions comes into it as well, which we oversize things based on expectations for growth. And as development happens, we get a development contribution back, and that helps to, so we loan fund that extra capacity, and that pays off that bit of loan. So not all loan is repaid through rates, and it's definitely not a good thing if we're paying operational costs through loans, but it is good for large infrastructure projects. It makes sense. It's fairer on everybody. And importantly, it allows us to do what we need to do. People can argue whether everything we spend money on, or everything, all those projects where we do borrow for, whether they're worthy or not. In the case of water, they are things that we deem are important both to meet the regulations, but also to improve water security for people, either making sure it's safer or making sure that it's more resilient. And those are really important things that we shouldn't overlook.
So we've got a few questions that have come in around the CCO before we move towards the water metering topic.
Sorry, Mandy. That person asking that question mentioned $200 million of debt. We don't have $200 million of debt. It's I believe it's sitting around 70.
70 at the moment, yep.
70 at the moment. We've just had a repayment of 15 million from the retirement village, which we're going to have a discussion on next week around what that's used for. To my mind, a serious chunk of it needs to actually just pay off some of the external debt, but we'll have that discussion next week. So certainly a far cry from 200 million. Sorry, Mandy, back to you.
No, perfect. No, as I was saying, there's a few questions there around the CCOs that have come through, and some came in beforehand as well. And then we've got some that's come through on water metering. So one of the questions that's come through around the CCOs, are the other council areas that we may join up with as up to date with their infrastructure as what we are, bearing in mind that we brought those projects forward that we've loaned money for already, so we don't end up subsidising users from other councils?
Yeah, so it really depends on how things are set up, and I think the key thing is no councils are expecting to get price harmonisation from day one. So that's where everyone just pays the same regardless of where you are, which council area you're in, and which part of those council districts you're in. At best, it's probably going to be 5 years. It could be 10 years before harmonisation comes in. So what it allows is if a CCO takes over, it's then running the activities for 4 or 5 councils, whatever the number might be. It gets on with the work program they deem necessary, and that will, I believe, be in fairly close consultation with each council, but also their infrastructure plans that we have. And there will be that opportunity to level up a bit more, and that's certainly our expectation. So those who are behind, that they are brought up to speed, and those that are doing well, that they maintain their position of doing well. At some point in time, there is likely to be some levelisation. It may be subsidisation, where actually it's not all the same, but actually, there's some savings made here, so that helps to offset costs there. Those are things to be determined, and that is part of the discussion that we need to have.
I think in general terms as well, most of the other councils that we are talking about entering into a partnership with are probably fairly similar state in terms of their investment in water infrastructure. We've seen lots and lots of councils recently increase the amount that they're contributing towards investment in water's infrastructure. There may be some areas where they're more advanced than us, in terms of wastewater discharges or water treatment plants, and some areas where we're potentially more advanced than them. And I think overall we're probably in fairly similar states, which is why we're also having discussions with them as partners.
Yeah, I think the study we've had done for the 4 southern councils, including ourselves, is that Gore is the outlier, Gore District, and they show a sharp increase in costs. Their figures haven't, it's an apples with oranges situation. Their figures haven't taken into account the likely change to discharge for wastewater. When that's factored in, that they don't have to discharge to land, that they just need to treat more, those prices will come down, and that will bring everyone much closer together. So, yeah, Josh is correct that generally speaking, what's forecast for expenditure across those 4 councils is within reasonable distance of each other. So there's a lot of factors in there, so you can't say we're exactly the same as them or we're much better or worse, but we're within Kiwi.
Thanks for that. So we've got a question here that if Waters was to become a CCO company and neighbouring councils do amalgamate together, will there only be one board of directors for the mega CCO, or will there be a board within each participating council?
Good question. The intention will be there's one board, one CEO, one board. I mean, that's part of the efficiencies. And the devil is in the detail. It's how are those directors appointed, and how are they made answerable back to every district or every council area that is joined together to create that mega CCO. And those are discussions we're having at the moment, and it's again, the 4 southern councils are all, we're all relatively similar in size, and our infrastructure is, it's probably, it's proportionate. This is the word I'm looking for. Proportionate to the population sizes. So it's all reasonably fair as far as that goes. But the idea is that most likely there will be a shareholder committee that's formed by the councils with representatives on that. They will appoint the directors, looking for all of the skills that are deemed to be necessary, and whether that's legal or accounting or in this case, having someone, a qualified engineer on there would be very good. So it's looking at making sure that there's a board that can make good decisions and work in a really commercial way to get the best value out of the situation.
So further to that, the same person's asked, but there be only one service centre for the combined districts, if that's the way that it goes, or will each district have a local service centre? And will there be service personnel that remain localised to enable timely repairs to their particular work? network?
Yeah, so there may be different contractors right across that area. We're looking at, with the 4 southern councils, there's a population of 85,000 people, an area of, I think it's around 24,000 square kilometres. It's a big area, so we want to make sure that we've got contractors based in every district, because, you know, there's, Gore's relatively small, but, it needs to have people based there. The Waitaki district is not perfect. We've got 7,000 square kilometres. We've got our contractors based mostly around Oamaru, which is relatively central. But it's always a challenge if there's something, a pipe bursts in Marama, for example. So, Josh, what's your expectations around what's workable and feasible in today's environment?
No, I think what you're saying is absolutely true, Gary. You know, ultimately, a lot of the savings that come in with an amalgamated CCO, where we've got multiple councils all pitching in, is probably in the back office area, rather than necessarily with service staff on the ground in terms of maintaining these networks. There's still a certain number of people that need to be physically on the ground to be able to undertake the work, and we wouldn't want people travelling significant distances to be able to do so. So I'd expect that there'd still be a local presence in each of the districts, or even potentially an expanded presence.
Yeah, we're not. I don't think it's for councils to stipulate where like a head office should be for it. That needs to be a decision that's made on what works. Bearing in mind, we want to make sure that CCO is able to recruit the best people that it can, and if they need to be based in one place, then that might be the case, but otherwise there could be a number of head office, but with some branch offices. What it will allow is that for the current teams within 4 councils to come together to work more as an individual unit. They'll all have localised knowledge for their own districts, but they'll be used on whatever projects are there. The efficiencies will mean that some of the contracting prices, contracting costs that are incurred because we can't employ all of the skills that we need, but with that larger entity, they've got more chance of being able to employ some of those skills. So some of those specialist areas where they would normally have to go somewhere else to be peer reviewed could be done more in-house. So saving some of that money. And I don't know if it was consultants for water last year, was it around $1 million or something? Do you know?
Oh, I haven't looked at that recently, Gary.
I had an idea it was around that, but it's enough to actually employ a lot of skills on staff.
So maybe too soon to answer this question. Will a water services call centre be the only point of contact, or will consumers still be able to contact their council directly on water matters if there was a mega CCO and service centres within districts? They'd be able to go direct to council on wider matters.
I think to Paul's point earlier on with the Commerce Commission establishing an economic regulator that would ensure that there'd be equitable access for customers to services, there would likely be an opportunity for people to be able to contact a CCO or council if council was continuing to deliver that service in whatever way that they had to. Obviously, with staffed offices, there does come a cost in terms of maintaining service centres open for people, but it might be that whatever the CCO is still continues to partner with council and share some of the services in terms of front counter staff. Yeah,
well, I think there might be a transition, but ultimately it's going to be a reasonable, ideally it's going to be a reasonable size CCO. For us, I don't know how many customer liaison people we have here overall and what their time is spent, but say it's 1.5 FTE spent a week on water services. If that's replicated elsewhere at other councils, potentially they can have 5 or 6 people in a contact team and deliver a really good service that focuses on water, and that will allow prompt responses. And definitely that regulator side of things. They will be looking at response times for people, for people calling up with issues and how quickly they get them dealt to. So that's really important, and that's why having contractors spread around the whole region will be important. And as far as who those contractors are, that's going to be up to the particular CCO, should we go ahead with that.
Great. So we have a few more questions here on the water there's a number of questions that have come in regarding water metering. So just one question there is, who is overseeing / running the Stonyburn water scheme in Palmerston? No one seems to be able to tell us. And they don't mean the contractors doing the repair work.
Right.
So it's one of our schemes.
Yes. Yep. The Stoneburn scheme is one of council's water schemes. We have quite a few.
16 or 14? No, quite a few. So yeah, if that person's got some particular concerns about that, feel free to let us know. It's in the Wahimo ward, so they can talk to either the service centre in Palmerston or contact Councillor Thompson or contact us. So if you've got an issue, let us know.
Thanks for that. So one of the people listening said that the note we're talking about, the extra reservoir at South Hill and the one before that, both of those projects were brought forward, and why? Our RTP was excellent and our population did not suddenly increase that we needed to do those works at great cost and on borrowed money. Also, didn't you recently say you had excess development contributions which were sidelined? Why were these not put into these projects?
If we have excess development contributions, we're required by law to give them back if they're not going to be used for the purpose they were gathered. So there is legislation around that. Essentially, on the South Hill, I'll talk to that because I'm more familiar with, because it's done more recently. Essentially, we had 10 hours storage in the existing tank on the South Hill. So if all pumps failed, there was a major issue. We've got to get people conserving water as quickly as possible and really try and make that water last as well as it can. Putting the extra tank in there increased that capacity to around 24 hours. Still not a long time, but a better amount of time to be able to get people to conserve water and potentially stretch that out. Water meters will play a part in actually improving those statistics too, and we'll get into that in a wee while. As far as the ones at the treatment plant itself, the new tank there, Josh, do you remember what the figures were?
Yeah, well, the duration of storage, no, not particularly. The reservoir there held about 8 megalitres a day. On average, we, as a community on the Oamaru water scheme, consume around 12 million litres. Yep. So with the additional reservoir, which it was always planned to have an additional reservoir, we constructed probably about 5 years earlier than was originally planned, but still within an appropriate timeline, I think. Particularly when we're talking about 100-year infrastructure, that takes our storage just at the Oamaru water treatment plant site to just over 24 hours. It's all about building in some resilience for the community. Oamaru, in particular, we had to issue some water restrictions. That would have been 4 years ago now, when we had a storm event that interrupted the supply of raw water that we weren't able to treat. So when we had that instance where we had to implement water restrictions around Oamaru, we thought it would be best for us to have some additional storage so we wouldn't run out of water so quickly.
Yeah, and there's lots of projects, unfortunately, coming up around that. I mean, we're carrying out projects at the moment around reducing the risk of backflow from particularly large commercial properties, and that's really important where contaminants can get into the drinking water supply from a property that's serviced. So, there's some work like that. Arguably, it hasn't been there in the past. Do we need to do it? I think as soon as an incident happened, people would say, "Why weren't you doing it?" So there is that. We've had some discussions on the Artgown Dam. There's a whole lot of new dam regulations around it, and the up on the reservoir itself. The formation is referred to as Artgown Dam. That's holding that up, and that's a risky aspect of the system. Do you want to go into a wee bit of that? Because it just gives people a bit of an awareness, I think, of these are the challenges that keep coming at us with
So the
ageing infrastructure.
the Oamaru water scheme is, as I said, quite old. We used to use it to generate electricity within the township itself. There used to be a dedicated race that came down from the Waitaki River to the Ardgowan Dam. There were 3 people working full-time trying to maintain that race. And when the Lower Waitaki Irrigation Company brought the race in that added a whole lot of irrigation through to the Puriri Plains, it was thought that a better source of water for Oamaru would be using the Lower Waitaki Irrigation Company race. It would help with sharing some of the cost burden in terms of the irrigation company, but it was also resolve this issue of the old Oamaru Borough race, which did have quite a high operational cost and fairly low resilience overall. So we now pump water from Redcastle Road pumping station up to the Ardgowan Dam, which has been in place for 140, 150 years. And water is stored at that dam before it then goes into our water treatment plant. The Ardgowan Dam itself at the moment contains about 6 days worth of water storage before it gets treated, and then that where it's treated then goes into our treated water reservoirs, which, as I said, hold just over 24 hours. So overall, the system itself is not particularly resilient. We're talking about having on hand around 7 days worth of water supply, and those are some of the things that we need to make some improvement in.
Yeah, we're very aware of things like the Alpine Fault being a bit overdue for happening. We're less at risk here in Oamaru, but yeah, it's still a concern, and so making sure that infrastructure is resilient is important. So going back to the original question, why are we building those sorts of resilience? It's good. It makes good sense for our community. They are important, and if something bad does go wrong, then we're more likely to get through it as good as possible. So that's hopefully an answer that they'll understand.
That's great. So we've probably got 2 more questions on the water and CCO before there's a lot of questions there that have come through on metering. Mm-hmm. So do we know what the new what the new regulations for wastewater are or going to be, and how non-compliant we are going to be?
At the moment, we are meeting consents, but when we have to renew our consent, it's likely we won't. And so as far as the indications of what those standards will be, I'm not aware. The indication had been that they would need to be discharged to land, as we've mentioned. That's not likely to happen now, as much as there are some cultural reasons around doing that and so on. But yeah, if we're able to treat water well enough that it's actually as good or better than we took it out of the environment, that's good. Hopefully we can treat it well enough that it can actually be used for irrigation and actually improve productivity around the place. But Josh, any indication that you've heard of?
Yeah. So some, I suppose, further specifics. At the moment, wastewater discharges are up to the regional councils to essentially dictate to us what our consent requirements are. As I mentioned earlier, the water regulator, Taumata Arawai, is looking at having some standardisations that are essentially based on receiving environment. So if it's being discharged to a surface water, like a creek, or if it's being discharged to the sea, or if it's being discharged to land, each of those would have different discharge requirements on them. And they'd essentially become the blueprint, if you like, for whatever consent a regional council would then give us for discharge. We don't yet know what those standards look like. They are being worked on at the moment. They've been hopefully promised for the next few months, but
Well, they're supposed to be released by the draft standards are supposed to be released by the end of this month. That's the latest indication, because both regulators and the government realise that it is critical to actually have these draft standards out for the water service providers to actually come up with an appropriate water service delivery plan, which is, as Gary said, that's due by essentially the start of September. So there's not much time to pull a pretty complex document together. So having the uncertainty of sort of these unknown wastewater standards, which as we talked about, are going to drive a significant amount of cost. They do realise it is important they are released pretty soon, and they have said by the end of February, so we'll waited with bated breath.
Yeah, cross our fingers.
So onto meters. So at the moment we've got kind of three different ways of delivering water. One is unrestricted supply, and that's what most residential properties are on. One is restricted supply, which is what a lot of rural and lifestyle blocks are on. And the other is metered, and that's particularly relevant to commercial properties that do use a relatively large amount of water, or more than an average amount of water. So places like motels and boarding hostels and factories and the like. But also there are some lifestyle blocks where meters are on there, and for whatever the decision was made in the past, Kurau as a township is on meters. The meters that they are on and the others are on are all manual, and there are now automatic smart meters, basically, that can be connected in, and they provide quite a considerable better information than what the manual meters do. So, Paul, have you got any information on the level of costing, or how we might structure costing?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a variety of approaches to costing, but most of them revolve around, generally there's a fixed charge, so it's for being connected to the network. Probably the example we've looked most closely at was Central Otago, where that's sort of around $500 a year. And that's because there are an awful lot of fixed costs in having these large complex networks available. So there will be some contribution that everyone has to make, and then the other piece is a variable charge based on the volume you use. And that can be either sort of a tiered charge, where the more you use, the higher the charges are, or just a fixed charge for everybody, where it's just a fixed amount per cubic metre of water that you use. So there's a variety of methods and approaches. Part of this reform will actually allow considering charging for wastewater based on the amount of water going into the house and into the property, because there is a strong correlation between the two. So again, moving away from a fixed charge per connection or pan or toilet, which version you like to use, to something that actually recognises the higher loads that some places put on the system compared to others. We talk a lot about water supply, but wastewater is also important. So we do have things called trade waste charges, which are purely on commercial premises, which look at both the volume and the type of waste that's being discharged, and charge based on that. So being able to move to actually be able to charge all properties on sort of a volumetric basis would be a big change that the CCOs or the council of the provider will need to look at, to try and make it as fair as possible and give people as much choice as possible about really the charges they face. So again, very much like the electricity example, where there's a line charge that everyone pays, and then a variety, you can go on to different plans. Might not quite get that sophisticated, but certainly want to give people choice and recognise where people make an effort to reduce their usage, because that can have some very significant long-term benefits, which I think is maybe something we can talk about further as well.
So there's often a lot of opposition to metering, and the idea that you bring meters in, everyone's going to pay more. But I know over in Central Otago, they had basically 100% change from the previous unmetered supplies to metered. Maybe one or two elected members lost their jobs, but that's the reality of that situation. I know also that likes of Grey Power in that area were very opposed to meters. Once they came in, they actually realised that their members were some of the main beneficiaries of it. But Josh, do you want to talk about, I guess, the ability to save water and conserve water, and what the, why would we bring meters in? What's the other benefits for it?
Yes, yep. So I suppose first up, the benefits of water meters is kind of twofold. One, it means that we make the best use of the investment we've already made in the infrastructure that we already have. We don't need to upgrade water mains because they're too small, because people are using so much water. As a collective group, we in the Waitaki use quite a lot of water. The average at the moment across New Zealand is around 250 litres per person per day. We use about 532. Obviously, we've got quite a lot of stock supplies, which do consume a bit more water, but on the whole, we do use quite a lot of water, which means that our pipes, our water treatment plants need to be upgraded sooner than they normally would be, because we've got issues where we need to increase the capacity because we're using so much water. And what goes in must come out. So to the other side of that, we then also need to upgrade our wastewater systems. We need to have larger sewer pipes. We need to have larger pumps and larger work well chambers, and there's higher risks of environmental discharge where there's overflows from sewer because there's a lot more water going into the system than what we need. So in terms of benefits, us metering can potentially allow us to really offset the cost of further investment in capacity upgrades for both our water and our wastewater supply. In terms of what people can do to try to save water, obviously there's water efficiency ratings on most appliances now, household appliances. But the biggest thing that people can do is to make some simple behaviour changes. Slightly shorter showers. The number of people that I see washing a car and leave a hose running into the gutter instead of turning the hose off or using a bucket of water. Those little things where you are just a little bit conscious about the resource that we have in water and recognise that it has a value means that we make slightly different behaviours, which means we maybe turn that tap off rather than leave it running longer than we have to. Or, stop sprinkling our gardens with water while it's raining, which we do see quite a lot as well.
So one of the things that happens every time when an area brings in meters is there is a conserving of water, and that's been quantified as around 20-25%. So I guess if we're looking at the South Hill, that 24-hour storage suddenly goes to at least 30%, 30 hours storage, and the same thing at the reservoir. That storage increases. We haven't had to, we've put meters in, but they're relatively cheap and so on, but we've managed to get a whole lot of extra capacity essentially just because of that. But they're also good at finding leaks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And we have a lot of leaks.
Yeah. Yes, we do. Yep.
So, there is a methodology around how leaks are measured, but what it does is allow us to monitor how much water is going into a particular area and then how much is being used by each property, and just see if there's actually leaks that might be happening somewhere because of that, and get them dealt to. Because not all leaks just appear on the surface, and particularly up the valley, just disappear into the gravels. And Kurau is a good example of where there is a lot of wastage.
Yeah, we do regular leak detection within the networks to minimise the amount of leakage that we have, but it can be very, very difficult to pinpoint because we do rely on listening gear, but with some meters being in the network, it will help us pinpoint to a closer proximity where some leaks might be.
Yeah. Mandy, you've been fairly quiet. Would you like to say something? Mandy's been bursting to say some more questions. So.
We've got a number of questions that are coming through on the water meters, and we are running quite short of time. So I guess one fairly simple question is, and you've probably answered it in roundabout ways, but do we actually need water meters, as we have very few participants to pay for that infrastructure, and we haven't had the water supply problem in Waitaki that some of our neighbours have had?
So if we use smart meters, it makes a lot of sense. Not only can we keep an eye on the usage on every property and have a red flag come up if there's an extraordinary amount of water being used, but equally there are opportunities for people to do that themselves. As people know, there's different apps to monitor things. You can have an app on your phone which actually lets you see how much water you're using, and you can actually adjust it accordingly so that If there is a cap that's the basic charge covers a certain amount of water, then you know whether you're going to go over that or not and make the decision as to whether you do. So there are the reasons for doing it is it saves water, it puts off future investments that will be needed otherwise, and it definitely helps to find those leaks, and it allows people a bit more control. And for those people who don't use a lot of water, they won't be paying the same as the people who use too much water or a way lot more water. The person who's filling up their swimming pool will be paying for the pleasure of filling up their swimming pool versus the person who's living on their own and not using much water at all.
So I've got a question here that's got quite a few parts to it. If metering water is planned, what is the cost of implementation? Will general water rates disappear, or will council double dip under the premise of maintenance? Will revenue gathered from water be put back into water? And how are costs going to be regulated, and who will deem the value per 1,000 litres? So, do you want me to break that?
Okay, very quickly. So our water activity is ring fenced. If revenue comes from water, it's spent on water, and in most cases, pretty much all our cases, if it comes from that water scheme, it goes back into the water scheme and wastewater scheme, respectively. So councils do not run for profit. If we need to, if we've got something coming up where we actually do want to accumulate some funding, maybe there's a major pipe replacement done, which we want to collect some money and loan fund the rest, then there's the opportunity to do that. But when we're not allowed to rate people for an activity and then spend it somewhere else. Does that answer all of those bits?
I suppose just in terms of who's going to dictate what the price per cubic metre might be, a lot of that's probably going to come down to the economic regulator, who are going to be ensuring that firstly we're spending enough on maintaining our system, so there'll be minimum pricings, but also maximum in terms of making sure that we're not overcharging people when we need to.
And I think this is a behaviour setting as well. Paul mentioned before Central Otago, base charge maybe around $500 for water, and then after you've used a certain amount, then you pay for each cubic metre. They're changing that. They're having a much lower fixed cost, and the metre cost is going up because pretty much for that reason I mentioned before around filling swimming pools. There are people who are doing that and using much more than and not paying significantly more than people who aren't using that much water.
So just a simple question here. If water metering is implemented, simple might not be the word, will the $305 cost per toilet pan be rescinded?
No. Different charges, different service. If we go back to what Paul said around charging for wastewater, it may be a bit like water. There might be a base charge and then a surcharge for estimated volume. The wastewater is not metered.
No.
I'm not sure quite how that would work, but that's essentially what it would be.
Yeah.
So those things all need to be consulted on if we get to that point. And the idea that for this long-term plan is simply to put it out there. There's some good reasons to look at water metering and what do people think about it, and obviously this is the opportunity to try and inform people as much as we can about what are the good reasons. There's not too many bad reasons actually, so it's looking at what are the reasons, how will it impact you, and please make a submission on that.
So will residents be able to read meters for themselves, or will the information simply go into council offices or water offices?
It works best when you can read it yourself. So if it is a smart meter and you can have an app on your phone, then that is the best way to do it. It doesn't have to be an app. It might be just a bit like your electricity meter that you can go and look at the reading on that and see how much you've been using. So whatever makes it most easily read by you to be able to make any changes that you want to. So you've got the control over how much water you use. particularly the discretionary amount of water. We don't want a situation where people are just too scared to use water because it's going to cost. So it's trying to get the right balance between a fixed charge and a fixed amount, and then a variable charge for any extra.
So why don't we just restrict town users as we do with rural and rural residential? 1 point per day would provide you with a set target for supply, instead of just watching residents use any amount of water that they want and charging based on an amount used. Just average out the cost of a set amount per household and avoid running out due to overuse.
So
Well,
a point is what, 1,200 litres?
I mean, quite simply, if you're going to have a rural scheme, that means you're going to have to put water tanks into every residential property because it's a trickle supply. That's how a restrictor works. So it's an impractical solution for urban areas, especially if you're trying to retrofit it. An on-demand supply is actually far more appropriate for an urban setting, and a meter is a better way to control it rather than a restrictor. And a restrictor just, you get a trickle supply into your property, and so that's the way it works, and so it's not suitable.
Yeah. The meters themselves are around about $100. I think the Tobys that most properties have, they've got the right setup that a meter can easily be screwed onto it. So all of those things are relatively straightforward. The cost of implementing is certainly it's a lot cheaper than what we thought it was going to be. And even with a restricted supply, if you've got I'm at Western, I've got a single point restricted supply. I think that's 1,200 litres. Josh didn't answer.
Different schemes have different volumes. I believe
Yes.
it might be 1,800 litres.
Could be 1,800 litres. The small residential property beside me is possibly using maybe 500 litres. So it's, is it? I'm paying the same as them currently. Not that I'm using 1,800 litres. It's we probably only use a fraction of that, but it's fair. It's like, would you go backwards and say, actually, we're going to just charge everyone the same for electricity? It doesn't matter how much they use. We wouldn't be proposing that, and this is really the same in reverse. It's like, we charge for the amount of electricity you use, we charge for the amount of water. Sorry, we don't. Network Waitangi and Meridian, etc. do. So using a similar system is about fairness and user pays. And for us, it's simply about what is the fairest way of recovering the cost of delivering water services to our district.
So if we're already on a restricted supply, does it stay that way, or does it go on to a per litre meter?
You can talk about the reticulation, Josh. I think if it can be metered and on a restricted, so even then you still get the benefit if you're not actually using your daily quota. That would be my preference. But as far as what would need to happen to get rid of the restrictors.
Yeah. So generally, if you're currently on a restricted supply, you'd still be on a restricted supply. Restricted supplies mean that we can put smaller pipes in than we would in an urban setting, because we don't have to cope with delivering water during those peak periods when lots of people use water, say the morning or the afternoon. We can deliver it over that 24-hour period, and your tank essentially becomes the balance that allows you to have water on demand. But if you were on a restricted supply, you continue to be on a restricted supply. As Gary said, if you wanted some control over how much is coming in and how much you're using, you could potentially meter it. But equally, if you wanted to put a meter between your tank and your household, you can do that anyway, just to see how much water you are actually using.
I'm just wanting to make sure we get the discount for not using so much. Anyway, it is a bit of detail that we just need to figure out a bit more, but we're certainly having some good discussions with some of the suppliers around the meters and the types of options, and we're looking at how we can trial this. We're up to or getting close to needing to replace the meters at Kurau. So one of the proposals is that we switch out those manual meters for smart meters, and that'll help us get a better idea of how it's going to work overall.
So Do we know how much it is expected to cost to install water meters to every property on the Oamaru water supply, and how long it would then take, or how long we would expect it to take before we make a return on the cost of installing those meters?
From what the suppliers say, the return on investment, so the amount of money that you spend, how quickly will you make that back in savings? They are talking it's anything from, in the best cases, I think was around a couple of years, and it could be 4 years. So quite quickly, but like any investment you make, it's like how quickly do you get your money back, and that's essentially looking at that 2 to 4 years.
So one of the listeners has said, I take on board your earlier comments regarding water savings by having water meters. But on that then, why did we then invest all that money into the extra reservoirs when we could have circumvented that by installing meters sooner?
24 hours of water supply is not a lot, and that's what we've got now at the two, both the South Hill and at the main reservoir. This is about increasing that and making sure that we've got enough capacity for growth and so on. So over time, if we get meters and we then have an equivalent of 30 hours, it will get eroded away as there's more development happens. So we're going to have to increase capacity again in the future, but it certainly is going to look after a good period of time before it gets anywhere near that 24 hours. It's just about resilience, and 10 hours supply on the South Hill, putting meters in might have given us 12 or 13 hours. That's not a lot of time, and I think people would be, if something went wrong, people would be saying, why did you not do something more than what you have?
Thanks for that. Question here, has the council actually conclusively scoped the use of smart meters as they are reliant on the cellular network, which is rather patchy in numerous areas of Waitaki?
The technology does use a Wi-Fi type setup. Josh, have you looked into the details of that?
Yes, a little bit. So we've had some discussions with several market players, because obviously what's important when we're investigating any investment is looking at who's going to offer the best possible product at the best possible price point. Most providers now are using IoT networks, LoRaWAN, which most of them are piggybacking off Spark or Chorus's systems. Rather than having cellular devices, they're actually using LoRaWAN, which is essentially picking up each of the nodes that are already in place within the Chorus network, rather than having to create something new from scratch.
Yeah, and they communicate through each other to essentially create the picture overall. So very energy efficient. So a battery meter comes with a battery built in. How long does that battery last? Do you recall?
10 years.
Yeah. So good long time. So they're not needing, and with smart meters you don't have to have someone going around checking them, which currently with our manual meters we do. In Kurau we check them twice a year, is it?
Yeah.
And commercial users?
Quarterly.
So, rather than checking every 3 months or 6 months, they basically can be checked any time. And, the idea would certainly be that they could be billed monthly if that was what was decided. I know we're 10 minutes over, but I think there's some good information hopefully coming through. So we'll carry this on just a little bit longer and hopefully get through some more questions.
Yes, we've got a few questions that we received earlier on today, and I think some of them you've sort of addressed. I think Mr. Hope may have addressed regarding the potential for having a low users being rewarded for being environmentally friendly per se, similar to the electricity sort of scale. Another comment that person made was often when metering is introduced, the usage quantities drop due to finding overlooked leaks and or being more frugal in water use. If the water company budgets for a certain income, but that is then not realised because of reduced usage, will the company then increase their charges, or will they accept this lower usage as a benefit in itself?
Lower use decreases costs to a degree, but it is something that our team has to deal with, because we do have a considerable amount overall that is metered. Water that goes to Oamaru Meats, for example, to to the woolen mills and various other places like that. You know, take a reasonable amount of water. That's all got to be budgeted, and I'm pretty sure very difficult to get it exactly right. I'm not sure which one of you wants to answer.
Well, I think, you know, Tara, we're sort of trying to answer the question in the way things are at the moment rather than the way it will be, which is the economic regulator is going to be very focused on the pricing that all water entities charge. So, you know, they are there to mostly to protect the consumer. So there is going to be a very different regime about pricing and charging. And I think that's, so the kind of situation you talked about, if there are long-term savings, then that regulator would expect those savings to be passed on to the consumers and be very diligent about making sure that happens. So that doesn't matter whether it's a CCO or a council doing it, there is going to be far greater scrutiny of price. That's not suggesting prices are unfair at the moment, because we set the rate at an individual scheme level. And we do have a good understanding of the prices, and as Gary said, we ring fence all of those costs and then either recover or offset surpluses and deficits. And so that is going to be even more heavily regulated into the future. So I think, for the benefit of the consumer.
Thank you.
So we have one comment here. Water infrastructure is a big part of any council. Will amalgamating the waters function across several neighbouring councils likely be a foreshadowing of the full amalgamation of councils like the Auckland Super City?
Yeah, I think there's certainly a number of councils that are concerned that is the next step towards large-scale amalgamation. The reality is we need to keep examining on how we deliver different services, and are they best delivered at a very much a local level, either within a district or within part of our district. Are they better to be delivered more regionally, or are they better to be delivered nationally? We would hope that actually the government does that same self-examination, because there are definitely some things that they do that we could deliver better for them in our local community, not necessarily us as council, but us as a community. If it makes more sense and we can deliver a service better and at a more regional level, then we should be doing that. We shouldn't be trying to hold on to water because we're worried about amalgamation. I'd be more worried that, for the councils that aren't having those discussions because of fears of amalgamation, they're more likely to be on that path to amalgamation because they're not actually prepared to work together and actually give their ratepayers the best deal that they possibly can. So, it could happen, but equally there's good reasons to believe it won't. But we shouldn't shy away from making the best decisions we can.
Thanks for that. So we had a couple of questions that came in earlier. I've just run our greater infrastructure for water assets. So in respect to ageing water schemes, how many kilometres of mains need to be replaced in the district? Are replacement pipes future-proofed in terms of, in terms of growth with regard to building, residents and users? And are existing services deemed suitable for growth, i.e. subdivision built and existing services going to and from said subdivision is insufficient?
Right. So quite a bit there, which Josh can probably answer all of it. Subdivisions for a start, if we take over infrastructure from a subdivision, it's got to be built to the right standards, inspected and approved. So there's that, and we would certainly hope to be involved in any discussions around, are they sizing it just for that subdivision, or actually do we want them to size it larger for future growth? Rest of it, Josh?
Yeah. So whenever we do replace water mains, and sewer mains for that matter, we do undertake network modelling to determine what is the expected capacity requirements of whatever that main might be. And sometimes that does mean that we're increasing the size of water mains. Where we do that, there is a portion of that renewal of the water main that is growth funded, and growth funded works are funded from development contributions. Thank you, Gary. So development contributions make their way into the upgrade of the network system through that process. In terms of how many total kilometres of mains need to be replaced, I can't give you that information at the moment. As I said, there's some mains out there that are 140 years old and still in really good operating condition, and there's some that are 40 years old and in really, really poor condition. Some of it's manufacturing of the water pipe itself. Other parts are due to local conditions and operations. Sometimes ground conditions have quite an effect on the expected life of a pipe, but it generally averages out over a certain period. If you look at an 1,800 kilometre network of pipes, which is what we've got, some reach life, some don't. But overall, yes, we do look at capacity requirements for water mains, and we do try to look at, well, if this main is expected to last 70 or 100 years, what is the likely capacity to requirement in this area in that next 70 to 100 year period?
So if you use a quick example, the Hamneck line, when we put water from the Oamaru Water Treatment Plant down through the communities of as far as Moeraki, we sized that so that there wasn't just the water that those current users needed, it was larger. So our team worked out what's the cost of putting the necessary pipe down just for those people, and then, okay, if we enlarge it, what's the extra cost of doing that? That extra cost gets covered by development contribution. So if anyone wants to join on, they've got to pay a contribution to help repay that aspect of the loan, and that helps to do that. You know, fortunately for the people in Mahino, when it became too difficult to look after their scheme, they asked council to take that over, and we had the capacity there to do it. So that was an unexpected situation, but it was one where we were able to help because we had the extra capacity there.
So we have another question there. What ideas are proposed for improving stormwater systems?
Stormwater. So it's the third water we don't talk too much about. It's been a challenge with all of the talk of water reforms as to is it really 3 waters or is it 2 waters, and what do we do with stormwater? We've got some challenges in our district. We have some stormwater systems, in a lot of places we don't. Places where we're relying on waterways and so on to get rid of any excess stormwater. Places where we just have challenges because of topography, so like the north end of Oamaru, some challenges we've got just because of gravel build-up and so forth, where things like the Oamaru Creek is getting increasingly full in large rain events, mainly because the bottom isn't quite as where it used to be. So we've got risks around that. So it's very difficult to know how to deal with that, because stormwater is not just what's in pipes. It's a whole network of parks. Arana Park is designed as a key part of stormwater management. So when it floods and there's the pond there, that's intended. It'll soak away over time. Other areas where there's similar infrastructure. Christchurch in particular is very good at putting in infrastructure where water can drain away, and so they didn't want stormwater to go the way of 3 waters. For us, it's very difficult if we haven't got water engineers on staff to still do stormwater, but we would expect to work closely with the CCO if that's where stormwater was being managed. There's a whole lot of things that come into it: spatial planning, district planning, developments, and so forth. So, yeah. So that hasn't answered the question properly. It's expected that it probably will be with the CCO, but it will still be something that councils are very involved in, and hydraulic neutrality, which is basically capturing stormwater on a property and keeping it within the property through different mechanisms are a thing. Just go back to the meters, actually. If people are paying for metered water, it's going to be more viable for some of those people if they've got a big garden to put a rainwater tank in, and a rainwater tank is a way of capturing some of that stormwater and not having it go to the into the gutters. Quite a bit of detail there.
Thanks for that. So our final question that we have, which is still a bit of still on the water topic, but it's slightly different, is just how is the progress on providing a fluoride-free water tap going? It could be as straightforward as an outlet with a fluoride filtration attached.
Josh? Paul?
A fluoride-free water tap. Council has been required by Health New Zealand to provide fluoridated water for the Oamaru scheme. So a fluoride-free tap would need to be one that is outside of the Oamaru scheme, i.e. people would need to travel to Waitaki or Duntroon or Kurau or another site where Oamaru water isn't actually delivered to be able to access that if one is made available.
So, what they're saying is, there's fluoride filters, which I understand aren't 100% effective, but is that able to be provided for those that wanted it?
I think if we were providing public water off the Oamaru scheme, then we might be acting against Health New Zealand's instructions.
Yeah. Right, thank you.
So that was the last question that we've got through right now. We've got a few that have come in after we put the sort of closing wrap in, so I'll leave it to you to wrap for tonight, and we can get back to any others that have come in that I've missed. It's been quite a few. So.
Yeah. Okay, we'll certainly respond to those online. So, thanks very much everyone for joining us, for taking the time. Apologies it has gone over, but it is a major topic for us. As I said at the start, it's something we've been dealing with for 6 years as far as the reform of water and how we deliver it. So hopefully you've found things to be useful. Now I've got some details on what else is coming up. Next week we've got another Facebook live stream. Is it going to be 7:30? Is that been confirmed, Mandy?
It's to be confirmed by availability of the panel. So
Okay.
we'll
So currently 7 o'clock, could be 7:30 though, we'll let you know. That's going to be focusing on the infrastructure strategy and the financial strategy, a couple of key aspects of that make up the long-term plan. It's the basis of the detail behind the plan. So there's that. We've got some public meetings coming up, and I don't know where the details on that went. We've got Kakanui tomorrow.
Wahima tomorrow.
Wahima, Palmerston tomorrow. That's right. Yes, I'm supposed to be there, Mandy. I haven't told you I'm not going to be there because I've got to go to Queenstown and back to meet with the Minister for Local Government.
and we've got Duntroon on Thursday night.
Palmerston 6:30 tomorrow night at
The Palmerston Hall, and then
the Sports Hall.
Sports Hall, sorry.
Yep.
And then on Thursday night in Duntroon, and then starting again at 6:30, and then next week we've got Napara on Wednesday night, and then Hampden on Thursday night.
Right.
All at 6:30 starting.
Okay, so that's opportunities for people to come along and speak specifically on any topics or just in general about the long-term plan. Please do take the opportunity to look at the details and either on the website. Last week's Oamaru Mail had the wraparound with a bit of the summary from our consultation document. There's definitely a lot more information on our website. So submissions can be made either through just by writing in, emailing in, but if you're on the form online, that's just got some of the questions in there that you can answer directly if you want to. So otherwise, thank you, Paul. Thank you, Josh, for your contributions tonight. And thank you, everyone who's helped support this production in the background. And thank you for tuning in and listening. Cheers.